Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. My name is Jon Sanders, one of the co-founders and co-hosts of EntrePastors, and in this episode number 98, me and Les Hughes and another one of our team members, Shane Odom, are going to be having a conversation around the topic of debt. Should I use debt to help build or grow my business? And there's a lot of different people out there with different thoughts on debt and, whether or not debt is a tool that should be used, can be used, or maybe something to be avoided altogether. We're going to wrestle with that on this week's episode of the EntrePastors podcast. So I'm grateful to have you watching. Thank you for being a part of the community here. And without any further ado, let's cut to the conversation for episode number 98. Here we go. The title of this episode is Should I Use Debt to Start or Grow My Business? But don't read too much into how I just set that up, because I'm not saying the answer is always no, but many people have a view of debt as being a form of bondage and something to be avoided, and yet we're going to talk about that a little bit. This would be a good time to bring in our guest for today. We introduced Shane Odom to our audience a few weeks back. He's really one of the newest members of our EntrePastors team, and we've got him here with us in the studio. Shane, welcome back to the podcast, man. We're glad to have you with us again today.
How are you guys doing?
Man, we're good. Glad to have you back. Looking forward to a good conversation. So real quick, before we jump into this, since we last had you on, we've introduced you into our EntrePastors Mastermind. We've kind of begun meeting as a new and improved mastermind, had a really great conversation with that group. And we're excited about having you on the team and kind of the level of business expertise that you bring to and I'm not going to go deep into your bio and all of your past. If someone wants to hear that, if they missed that episode, they can go back a few weeks and listen to that conversation. But let's jump into this. Like we touched on this a little bit in that conversation that we had with our mastermind, and Les and I agreed like this would be a good conversation to drill down into for our broader audience, because there's a lot here. So Les, anything you want to say before we jump in here? Any thoughts to set us up?
I'm going to state what some people are probably thinking. The reason that this is so relevant is that in particular, people in ministry, I'll say in particular pastors who've led, we've seen those people who've gotten way underwater and upside down, people who couldn't be as generous as they really wanted to, people who got almost like you mentioned, in a sense of bondage. I've even had somebody, this is taken out of context, but I had somebody quote the verse to me, it says no man anything but to love one another, as sort of a proof text for never going into debt. Now, we're going to talk about whether it's wise or not to borrow money, but that verse is not speaking about, borrowing money or going into debt. It's talking about loving other people. But I'm just using that as an illustration to just illustrate how deep this is. I mean, there are people that have a lot of emotion about, in particular, people in ministry and pastors who have a lot of emotion about not only the subject of money, but specifically the subject of borrowing and being in debt. So this is a real good subject, I think, for today.
Well, let me share my story real quick at kind of the 30,000 foot level, and then Les, you may want to share as well. I don't know, and then we'll throw it to Shane and start speaking at it from kind of a business point of view. But as a young guy many years ago, just getting started in life and marriage and whatnot, I was kind of following the American dream as it was being sold to me, which is buy now, pay later. It doesn't matter that you don't have the money, just borrow it. So we had credit cards and we had multiple car payments, and we had furniture payments. I mean, we had a mortgage. We got to the place of having two mortgages when we were in the process of, we bought a home in South Dakota as we were following God's leading up here, and quickly found ourselves that American dream turned into kind of an American nightmare when I sat down with a financial coach who showed me on paper, like, bro, you've got more money going out every month than you've got coming in. This is what's known as a problem. And I'm like freaking out now and saying, well, what do I do? And he said, well, we're going to turn to the Lord. And, he walked beside us as we kind of dug our way out of that hole, and God was faithful to help, provide in some new and exciting ways. But I've been there, man. I've lived there, done that, got the t-shirt. They almost took that away from me too. I never filed bankruptcy, but man, we probably were just one good emergency away from being in that place, So like I have felt that reality of owing a bunch of people money for stuff I bought that I couldn't afford. And, so then in my ministry years, I led with that. I introduced people to Dave Ramsey and to his concepts. If you've never heard of Dave Ramsey, I would invite you to come out from under the rock that you're living under and find out who Dave Ramsey is. He's helped a lot of people, get their financial house in order. He also has his fair share of critics. So let's just riff on this for a little bit,
Shane specifically, the conversation started the other day when someone was asking you about a specific business opportunity and situation that he was in without going into a lot of the details. The broader question is, it's probably talk about when it's wise. Well, first of all, whether you believe it's wise or not to borrow money when starting a business. You've had many businesses at a very high level, and so talk to us about just the general rule of thumb, and then maybe you can get it into some specifics on when it may be wise to use resources from somewhere else and when to absolutely avoid it.
Well, before we get started I have to back up to the intro. Lee Greenwood.
Okay, yeah. He wants to weigh in. Go ahead.
Now y'all hurt me.
Why?
The first time I actually heard that song was at a live concert that Lee Greenwood put on at a little mall in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is right outside Fort Bragg. And I was in the 82nd Airborne Division at that time. And me and my wife just happened to be going by there, and we seen all this commotion. And there was Lee Greenwood singing the song with thousands and thousands of people. And, he can play that song until the day I die, and I'm good.
All right.
Because it was just one of them experiences that goes way back. So I have a special place for it myself.
Thank you.
There you go. What year was that?
Anyway,
what year was that? What year was that?
North Carolina.
What year?
19. That would have been in 87.
87.
I think he wrote the song in 86.
Probably so. And it was fine then.
Okay. I got something for you. You like the song?
You're probably like Dolly Parton.
You like the song "How Great Thou Art"? I still cry when I sing that song, and that was like 18.
Let's not even compare. I
can't even respond to that because we have a large following of pastors. So let's just not.
There you go.
Well, I love "How Great Thou Art," and I love "God Bless the USA."
Okay,
maybe not equal footing, but
all right,
both. And I tear up in both of them. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. But
it's kind of interesting. The service at church Sunday they've been having a Solomon series. So we got to the part, and you guys, since y'all are pastors, this is how good I am at memorizing verses. This was yesterday and I already forgot, but whatever it was, the verse in Proverbs, it says, a debtor is a slave to the lender. Proverbs.
Slave to the lender. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So they got on a big roll about that.
Yeah.
So I've gotten to the point to where, I've been in church all my life. Les was very aware. And so now when we get into specific teachings and sermons, I actually like to go back and I actually like to look at it myself and then go back to the Hebrew and try to pick up on some of it, because sometimes you get what the pastor's feelings are and they sort of overtake what the Bible actually says sometimes. So I actually come back and I looked at that, and basically what the wording was from the original Hebrew meant that you were a worker. So we're all workers. So you being a worker to repay debt that you borrowed, you're just doing what you do every day. So that's kind of going back to, and that's kind of how I want to start. because a lot of times, specifically pastors, if you have said, or people that are in that position, they kind of look at debt as being bad. They just label it bad, period.
Mhm.
And most of them use that verse.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it comes from. Well, the
Right.
verse, when you go back to the original Hebrew and look at what it meant, doesn't mean what they're necessarily teaching.
Okay.
So let's take that as a different perspective as we move through and talk about debt and is how we use that in business to start a business or expand.
Well, before we get into the business side, could we all agree? Because I'm of the mindset that not all debt is good. Like there's some debt that probably is very wise to avoid, and therefore Scripture speaks of debt as not necessarily being a blessing. So what say you to that, Shane? Like from, if you saw one of your kids piling up high interest credit cards, buying pizzas and vacations and stuff like that, are you applauding that? Going, man, that's great.
No, let me yeah. So we'll go back and sometimes I need to clarify things I say, but the business debt and that you're using to grow a business or to get a business started, I categorize in a whole different category than personal debt.
Okay.
Because most personal debt, if you look at it, is on stuff that you don't need and you don't have the money to buy. You're buying stuff you can't afford, and you're hoping that you're going to have money to pay for it later. You're not borrowing money to go make money. Matter of fact, most times you're borrowing money to go spend more money because you're going to borrow money to go buy a boat that you're going to have to buy boat insurance on. You're going to have to repair. You're going to have to put oil and gas in. So now that debt you took on is more than actually the debt you took on.
Yeah, that's good.
So
You had
because most of the time it's toys. Now, if we're talking about taking out a loan or a mortgage to buy a home, I look at it in a totally different way because you're purchasing an asset.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're
there you
doing
go.
it
Okay.
in a halfway smart way, that asset you're going to be able to turn around and sell and at least come out even. And if you're good at it, you're going to make money.
You put it a different way the other day, and we were in a conversation. You weren't, reading off from any notes or anything, but this is part of your DNA. So I think you can reproduce it. You had a way to put it in a concise way, and I'm paraphrasing, but you basically said that, the things that you talked about that basically just eat up money and there's nothing to show for it are different than, when you can put on paper and do the math to where you're borrowing this, you're going to be paying back this, and you probably are going to make at least this as a result. I mean, there is an equation that you can look at. It's math, right? It's not speculation. Hope is not a strategy, but there are some formulas to look at. And specifically the scenario we talked about the other day is somebody had a business model that it had kind of been proven already, not by him, but by other people, including the research that he had done. And on paper, outside of just something catastrophic or something that he didn't foresee, it made sense to go into debt for that. And he even knew the month probably that it was going to be paid back, and then he'd be in the black again.
Right. So anytime somebody that's good in business is starting to borrow money to expand, and they have a need, if they're looking to borrow money to expand, there's a need there. There's something they're not being able to bring and deliver to their customers. Or there's a need there that they can fill and make more money. So when you start doing that, you're looking at, what are we going to make? What is the company going to make off of that new product, that new service, that new store? And what is it going to cost us to borrow the money? So the particular guy we're talking about, I think I remember right, he was looking at basically, after it was all said and done, net, the stores would generate about 15% of the revenue. And I think that ended up being about $90,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he was looking at borrowing, I don't know how specific we want to get with
just general, just broad.
He was borrowing a couple $100,000, just let's say, to start these businesses. And of course, you look at the model he's going to generate 90,000 a year, and he's turning all that money back in, that net profit. He's putting it back into business. So he has a model there. Actually, if things work by the model, he's going to have that debt paid off within 3 years. And the conversation we got into was every time I looked at buying a business, acquiring somebody, doing a merger or expanding, I looked at a 7-year formula. Can I borrow the money and put this into place and pay that loan back within 7 years? And if I couldn't do it in 7 years, I didn't do it, because most business people are an optimistic type person. So they're looking at minimums instead of maximums. So when we say 7, because we're type A, so we can make everything happen quicker than everybody else. So that 7 years may realistically be 10. That 3 years may realistically be 5, because sometimes everything that we want to happen just doesn't happen. So when you look at borrowing money in that context, you're borrowing money at whatever the percentage is. And you do get to a point where the percentage rates are too high. You just can't, it becomes too risky when percentage rates gets above 9 to 10% to borrow money. It gets tough. You have to be really good, or you have to have some kind of business where you're bringing a really large return in order to take that on. But in those kind of cases, when you've done it all and the math works, and the money is there based on projections from what another place has done, or a corporate entity has already done, or what's been proven in the market, or you've already done those and you're just expanding, so it's a safe bet. There is bad business debt though.
And we'll get into maybe some of the bad business debt. I've got some questions around that, but to stay with this for just a minute, I want to talk about the subject of risk, because you mentioned it, Shane. The reality is most entrepreneurs are eternal optimists. And so when we paint a picture, it's with rose-colored glasses, it's best case scenario, it's all the opportunity and everything functioning right. But let's go beyond what you're saying, that, well, maybe even it may take a little longer than what we had initially thought to pay that back. And let's factor in some risk of, like, the bottom drops out of the economy, or whatever industry you're in, takes a significant nosedive, things that you really could not fully predict. So your projections get all shot to pieces. And how do you factor in risk? I was just having this conversation with someone today, and I was trying to balance this out, because, like, on one hand, I was using the analogy of farming. If farmers only move forward when they had absolute guarantee of no risk, they would never even put their crop in the ground, because there's so much uncertainty. So there is a level of risk, and the more leveraged you are, the more debt you've taken on, the more money you've borrowed, you are putting your neck on the line a little bit more. So how do you, as a business owner wanting to make wise decisions, like, how do you manage risk and variables that you truly cannot see, a lot of unforeseen things? Like, what goes through your mind when I bring up the subject of risk?
Well, the first thing that actually goes through my mind is, as soon as you walk out that employer's door, it's all a risk. Matter of fact, if you want to look at it that way, there's no safety net in walking into the employer's door anymore either.
True.
Yeah.
So everything we do is a risk. Now, I will say that when we decide to leave that safety net of having an employer who's paying us a salary or hourly wage, and we're getting some benefits, and we have some place that we know we're going to go and be able to produce income and take care of our family, when we stop that and we go on our own, there's a lot more risk there. But my thing is, no risk, no reward. If you like what you're doing and you're happy going to working for the man every day, then keep working for the man. Or you can take your professional life into your own hands. You're taking a risk, and try to do it on your own. And hopefully, if you'll listen to the right people, you do the basic things right, every now and then you think ahead and go, maybe I should talk to somebody who's been forward from where I am, so I will know what to expect. If you're smart, you'll be all right. And, there's nothing that if you go into a business today and the world falls apart tomorrow, you really can't do anything about that. That's not you. But everybody else is going to be out of a job too. So you're not going to be the only one. The thing about most people that decide to leave that safety net of an employer to go start on their own, that business could fall apart tomorrow and they'll turn right around and they'll go do something else. It's just the nature of that type A personality. And if that's not your nature, if you're initially worried about, I could fail, then probably going into business is not the thing for you to do. Because really to be successful, you have to have a one-track mind. And that means failure doesn't come into your brain. You're moving forward. And if something happens, you just move forward faster and you keep digging and you keep going. And I think that a lot of people need to understand that going into business is not always an easy thing. It's tough, and you have to be prepared to do whatever it takes to make it work.
Is there a point, so this may get kind of to that whole theme of bad debt, but is there a point where someone can be over leveraged? Or let's say one of our people brings you in as a consultant, one of our audience members reaches out and says, I want Shane on site to do some consulting. Like, is there ever a point that you would look at someone's numbers and go, you've got way too much debt, you're over leveraged, or you've got debt in the wrong stuff? What say you to that? I know it's a really broad question without context or specifics, but
yeah, the answer to most of that is every time I've gone in and I've helped people, I would say 90% of the time, what I found is the debt wasn't the problem. The problem was with the business, and they kept borrowing money to try to sustain a model in their business that wasn't working. So by the time I get there, I'm looking at a broken business that they kept borrowing money just to keep letting it operate as a broken business. So most of the time, it's just the business itself that's not working. It's not the money. The money was a secondary issue.
So one application then we could take away, certainly this wouldn't be the only form of bad debt, but one form of bad debt, or maybe where it's truly unwise to use debt, is when it's a Band-Aid to hold over a problem, but we're not really fixing the problem. It's just stemming the tide of a business that already has some significant issues. So that would be one sign or warning of like, hey, this probably isn't a good idea to go get a loan because it's not fixing the actual issue.
Yeah, it's I'm not making any money. We need to go make some more money so we can stay open. Well, you're never going back and actually looking at why aren't you making any money? And that's most of what I can go in and do. And a lot of times the guys think, hey, I've taken a lot of debt on. I'm having a hard time. It's taking everything I make to pay back what I owe as far as debt service. And I go look at it, and the debt service isn't the problem. You weren't making any money before you got buried in the debt. And you just used that, like you said, as a Band-Aid to carry you through. But you never really went and addressed, your finger had a huge cut. It needed stitches, and you're putting a Band-Aid on it. So, that's more, but there is just plain bad debt. And there's a lot of scenarios that, I always tell people when they first get into business, don't go borrowing a bunch of money. Don't go buying buildings. Don't go buying vehicles. Don't buy an overload of inventory. Go in easy, lease a piece of property that you can get out of if things go bad. Just don't get yourself in a position where you're having to have, for a better word, you don't want to go initially start out in a situation that a mature company could handle because your company's not mature. You're still trying to get traction. You're still trying to figure out how to get to customers. You're still trying to get customers. You're trying to work around whatever competition you have. So you have to start out light. And unless you have a lot of money, if you have a lot of money, you can pour it in and just go crazy and hope it all works, because your risk scenario is a lot different. But most people that are going into business, most people that we are talking to, they don't have that situation. So
let me come back. This question is going to really be for like someone that's just getting started. They're a beginner, so they're transitioning from being, just having up to this point really operated their own personal finances. Maybe in some cases our pastor audience has had some hand in the church finances to some degree. Some pastors are a little more hands-on than others in that area. Maybe not. but now they're in business, and we've celebrated all the reasons, that the benefits of having an LLC and being in business for yourself. So I'm anticipating that mindset of, well, it's all good debt because it's all for my business. Like, so, if I need to buy new furniture for my office or something like that, it's good debt. Shane said it's good debt because it's for my business. And I don't think that's actually what you're saying and what you're meaning. So, speak to that startup. You kind of already did a minute ago when you said, don't go get yourself saddled with a bunch of debt, start lean. Don't just go starting to, buy buildings and vehicles and stuff like that. But like, I'm going to hit you with but I have a landscaping business and I drive, a Toyota RAV4 that can't pull a trailer and can't haul a mower. And so I kind of need something that can. So can I go borrow money for a truck or a dump truck if I need that for my business? Or, what say you to that? Like, speak to that person that's just getting started, and that difference between, do you really need that? And are you going to leverage debt to make that happen versus, no, that's actually going to help produce income?
Yeah. And, the thing is, you do have to have the tools necessary to do the profession that you're going into. And so, that specific example where the guy's going in the landscaping business, but he doesn't have a truck that he can haul a trailer and haul all of his lawnmowers and equipment. Yeah, that's good debt because you're not actually in business until you can actually do the job. Now, would it be nice for that same guy to already had a vehicle that could accomplish that he had already bought and was using? Yeah. But, you still come down to the fact that to mow the grass, you have to have a lawnmower, and to get it there, you have to have a trailer to put it on, and you have to have something to pull the trailer. Basic trades of the business. But yeah, you can't, I can tell you this. I had my main business for years of when I initially started, I didn't have a client walk-in type business. Matter of fact, very few clients even knew where my offices were. They didn't need to because I went to them. So for a long time, I didn't care. That I didn't. The furniture we had in the office was minimal. It was stuff that had come out of my house that was old, and that we just put down there in that office because we bought new furniture for the house, not with money we borrowed from the company, by the way. But so, everybody thinks they have to have these nice things and they have to look a certain way and they have to project a certain image. That's not always true. Your company needs to project a certain image to the clientele that it's representing and the clientele they're working with, not just for what you want it to be. So, the guy with the landscape business, he needs the correct tools to be able to do that job. But there's just different ways that, we used to have, I don't know how many years. I went for years and I didn't even own a forklift. And we unloaded semi trucks all the time, plus the stuff we're loading on our own trailers. But it was cheaper for me to rent that forklift when we needed it than it was to go out and buy one. A forklift at that point in time was like $15,000. So yeah, I needed that piece of equipment, but it wasn't worth spending $15,000 until I got to the point where we were unloading more and more trucks, and we were loading out more of our trailers, and we were transporting our own equipment to job sites to do work or to unload more and more trucks. So there's a difference. You have a need, but there are different ways to address the need, and that need doesn't always involve going out and borrowing money to buy it.
Yeah.
Look at the alternatives. There are different ways to accomplish what you need to accomplish without borrowing a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's key is knowing the difference between an asset that's going to produce income for me, or at best a tool, even if it's a depreciating item that will produce income for me, versus something that would just be nice to have. Even this is a really wild example, but even back to the truck scenario, I don't necessarily need to go finance a brand new $90,000 pickup that's going to be getting beat to, in this business. Like I can find something that's much more affordable, likely pay cash and work my way up. And I know that's common sense. It's what our grandparents would have called common sense.
Right.
Look at our culture today, it's not so common, apparently, because people seem to run out and finance all kinds of stuff that they don't need. So I think the tension that I'm trying to tap into, that Les and I really want to bring out in this conversation is, we still agree that by and large, consumer debt on, depreciating items or things that you don't really need, that's a really wise thing to avoid. That's why scripture talks a lot about it. And so if you have a biblical mindset that says, I want to stay out of debt, largely we applaud that and say we agree. However, and this is where like I might take a little bit of differing path from a guy like Dave Ramsey, who I very much respect the work that he has done. And he stays on message 100% of the time, basically saying, I don't borrow ever, and you shouldn't either. But I also know many other people on the other side of that, aisle that love God. They're godly men and women, and they've been very successful in business, who would say, yeah, there is a time to borrow money, and it's helped me get to where I am. And I think you'd probably be one in that camp that would say, I've borrowed money to help get me to where I am in my business.
Yeah, I remember I was driving to a job site in Auburn, Alabama one day, and Dave Ramsey was on radio. I couldn't pick up. There was nothing. I remember it vividly. There was nothing. You couldn't hardly find a station on the radio between Montgomery and Auburn, Alabama. You're like in no man's land. And I'm going down the road, and here's Dave Ramsey, and I'm riding in a nice truck, and I'm comfortable. The air conditioning's on. I'm doing good. And he's talking about you should never buy a new car. And you certainly should never borrow money to buy a car. And I remember going home, and I told Maria, and my wife, and I said, that Dave Ramsey, man, I can't listen to him anymore. And she said, why? And I told her, and the problem is, I think we all make blanket statements, and and even though I do it myself, blanket statements they're just not good, because every situation is unique. So in this instance, Dave Ramsey's telling me I'm an idiot, basically, because I'm driving a new vehicle, and I probably financed it. Matter of fact, I know I did. But I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, wait a minute, Dave, I'm driving 300 or 400 miles a day. Sometimes I'm putting 70,000 miles a year on a vehicle. I'm going to ride something nice, because I'm sure you're not sitting on a bunch of nails on your butt having your radio show. And then the finance part was, it's simple. I financed every vehicle we bought personally and every vehicle I've ever bought in the company. And the reason is I can use that money and I can finance it. I'm writing off the entire purchase of that vehicle within the business. And I'm also writing off the finance charges. So in a business application, Dave Ramsey didn't bring his blanket statement down, but for in the business application, how I bought vehicles was smart. Mm-hmm. It lowered my tax burden. And I needed them anyway, because I put so many miles on. Now, would I always advise you to do that in a personal setting? Probably not, but most people do have to borrow money to buy vehicles. Most people don't have $50,000 or $60,000 laying around, or whatever it costs to buy the vehicles they're looking at. I've always been big when you get into consulting and you're talking to different people about different issues. Don't be so fast to make blanket statements, because everybody has a little different situation, and there's tweaks in every business and different things that you can do and different things you need to do to make those businesses perform.
Yeah. Well, I think for some, hopefully this episode would be a word of warning for some that may be running way too close to the edge, or even going far beyond and just racking up debt that they're really going to struggle to get out of. And for others, it might be an invitation to reconsider some things, to go, look, you're in a little bit different world on the business side of things than when you're, just managing your personal finances. And like I'm not necessarily weighing in personally with hard opinions or blanket statements, to use your word, but yeah, just to have that conversation there. And get people thinking about it a little bit. And I like the fact that you said every circumstance is different. Therefore, we're not going to just say this is exactly what you should do 100% of the time. Les, what say you? You got anything to wrap up with?
This is another example of like scripture says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. And this is one of the reasons that we love conversations like this. It's one of the reasons that we began this community, specifically the Pastors Leadership Network, or the Pastors Business Alliance, our mastermind, the consulting services that we have that include Shane. I mean, because these are tailor-made decisions, right? Nobody has exactly the same scenario. You listen to the facts, you get a lot of input, but the bottom line is when you make a decision, you're the one that's going to have to live with the consequences, reap the benefits from that. And just as the scenario that Shane mentioned of going into debt for the vehicle, he was reaping the rewards of having that, and he was the one, his business is the ones that were paying for it. So that's a matter of personal responsibility. Not everybody's the same. Not everybody's risk aversion is the same. And so you got to know yourself. But I would say it's also important to really have a community of people that have been farther down the road than what we are, that can kind of show you where the pitfalls possibly are and the blind spots. And that's a shameless plug. That's, I think, where we can come in and provide some help.
Yeah. And again, maybe Shane, I'll ask you to just speak to this. We mentioned this a few episodes back when we introduced you to our community, but one of the things that we're bringing you on the team to do, in addition to really bringing more value to our mastermind and just having your business expertise there, we are offering consulting services. This may be a good point just to highlight that. What does that look like if someone, we've got a business owner out there, they're up and running, and they're like, man, this Shane actually sounds, in spite of his accent, he sounds like he knows what he's talking about when it comes to business stuff. Like, what does it look like to bring you in and have you take a look into someone's business and offer up that expertise through your consulting? Tell us about that.
Well, typically we like to go in for a 4-day run, at 5 days if you include travel, but we try to be on site 4 full days. And the reason we do that is we want to get in there and analyze the business in every aspect and of everything it's doing. We want to look at how the business is actually operating, what we're doing internally, what we're doing if we have people out in the field, how we're handling inventory, how we're handling expenses, how we're handling, everything that we're doing every day from the time we open the door to the time we close. I want to analyze all that, because if you don't analyze it as a whole, then you're not doing it justice. You can't just go in and analyze a set of financials and say, well, we're spending too much here. Well, you don't know how it's being spent. So that's typically what we want to do. Go in for a 4-day period. That's usually getting there on a Tuesday. We'll leave on a Friday. You go in there and give them 4 days, 10 hours a day, if that's what they want. I can't remember what we've set price wise. I think, we have a system for everybody to get in touch with our staff to coordinate that. But the other thing that's good about it is, it's like you said, it's always great to have a group of people around you that have been further down the road, because those people that have been further down the road, they know where the potholes are.
Yep.
And we're also not looking at it as being in the forest. We're looking at it from outside the forest. So we can give you a better analytical look at the whole business and what it's doing, what it needs to do. And we also have advice, because we can look at all that and go, based on what we see, this is where you're headed. If you're headed here, this is what you probably are going to run into when you get down the road. Yeah. And so if we can correct small mistakes that are being made that are going to lead to a big problem, then we've more than done you a service and saved you a lot of money. We've made you a viable company down the road that's going to be better than it ever would have been if you hadn't had somebody come take a look and give you some advice.
Yeah, very good. Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.